Good evening, you're watching News Mongolian World. I'm your host, Anur Khambatar. And for top stories, energy independence to eliminate air pollution. US Peace Corps volunteers sworn in. And many teens are suffering from anxiety and stress. And for the news, stay tuned. Air pollution is one of the most pressing issues in Ulaanbaatar city. The average PM 2.5 concentration is 46.6, which is linked to the burning of coal and other fuel in stoves in gear areas. The issue is aggravated by the limited capacity of Ulaanbaatar city's electricity grid, which doesn't meet the demands of constant migration from rural areas.
Mongolia's primary electricity grid was installed in 1960s and 1970s, but it has not been expanded to meet the needs of the city's growing population and shifting settlement patterns. Mongolia is currently dependent on imported electricity from Russia and China. The Mongolian government hopes to overcome the issue and establish a stable, continuous power supply to meet the increasing domestic demand. Industry experts note that energy independence could help to eliminate air pollution. Mongolia can meet its local demand through renewable energy production, as the country has an average of 257 sunny days per year and has frequent windy conditions. There are also nuclear energy solutions being considered. Nuclear energy is considered by some to be ecologically friendly energy, as nuclear energy production emits almost no carbon dioxide or fine particles.
According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the latest nuclear power plants are relatively compact and have become safer.
Another solution for eliminating air pollution is taking a different approach to urban development.
The policy of redevelopment in gear areas will continue in 2023. Apartment complexes of 2,007 households will be built at Bayangol Mountain Pass with $500 million in investment from South Korea. A project funded by the ADB is being implemented in Bayangol neighborhood. The Silp, Sharhat and Talgot areas are also in line for redevelopment.
Currently, 43 urban development projects are being implemented in 19 locations in Ulaanbaatar. From 2013 to 2023, 15,000 households benefited from urban development and moved into apartments. In 2022 and 2023, 6,030 households are expected to move from gear areas to apartments.
Adolescence is the transitional stage from childhood to adulthood that occurs between the ages 13 and 19. The physical and psychological changes that take place in adolescence often start earlier, between ages 9 and 12. Adolescence can be a time of disorientation and discovery. One study found that 1 out of 2 teens suffer from stress and anxiety to some extent.
We interviewed parents on the street to ask how they deal with their children's psychological issues.
Of course, parents should seek help from psychologists for their children's mental well-being. There should be some monitoring, especially in this time of social media, when children and teens have access to different content. We try to talk within the family to know what's triggering the problem and then look for a solution.
The transitional period of adolescence can bring up questions of independence and identity. As adolescents cultivate their sense of self, they may face difficult choices about academics, friendship, sexuality, gender identity, drugs, and alcohol. A study carried out over 5 years showed that out of 2,055 suicide cases, 605 were committed by children aged 10 to 14. Psychologists say that most teens have a relatively egocentric perspective on life, a state of mind that usually abates with age.
Most parents and teenagers that seek help from psychologists have communication problems within their families. It's a problem that can be fully resolved only if parents and children make an effort to understand each other.
Mongolia has set a goal to employ psychologists for all of its 800 secondary schools by 2024. Teens often grapple with insecurities and feelings of being judged. Relationships with family members often take a backseat to peer groups, romantic interests, and appearance, which teens perceive as increasingly important during this time. Experts say psychology and mental health-related curriculum should be included in health lessons at secondary schools.
Middle school students will learn about stress and anxiety and how to prevent it, while high school students will learn how to communicate when they feel depressed and suffer from mental health issues.
Experts say the number of psychologists working with children should be increased, as secondary schools have one psychologist for around 3,000 students.
Now let's take a look at Mongolia's current affairs.
A swearing-in ceremony for the 31st group of U.S. Peace Corps volunteers in Mongolia took place on January 18 at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Peace Corps Volunteers program, which was suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic, is resuming activities in Mongolia. The new volunteers will serve for 2 years upon completing 3 months of pre-service and Mongolian language training. The government of Mongolia values the development of English language education and has welcomed the volunteers to Mongolia. This group of Peace Corps volunteers will teach English at secondary schools in Ulaanbaatar, Darkhan, and Erdenet. Over 1,500 Peace Corps volunteers have served in every corner of Mongolia, making valuable contributions to strengthening relations and cooperation between Mongolia and the United States of America. Their work has strengthened people-to-people ties, social development, and English language education in Mongolia, and many volunteers go on to promote Mongolian culture in their home country. Representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the U.S. Embassy in Mongolia, Peace Corps Mongolia, and Peace Corps partner organizations and schools attended this swearing-in ceremony.
Thank you for staying with us. Now let's take a look at the currency exchange rates provided by Mongol Bank. East International News from our partner agencies. People across China are ringing in the Lunar New Year as crowds will visit temples after the government lifted its strict zero COVID-19 policy, marking the biggest festive celebration since the pandemic began.
With the easing of most COVID-19 restrictions, many people could finally make their first trip back to their hometowns to reunite with their families. Larger public celebrations also returned across the nation. But in central Beijing, large temple fairs, once the hallmark of the capital's New Year celebrations, remained suspended, yet crowds still appeared in some tourist areas, including the historic Qianmen tourist site. Zhang Yiwen, along with his wife and 2 sons, arrived in Beijing from Tanshan in the morning of the first day of Lunar New Year to celebrate at the nation's capital. In general, life is turning to normal because most of people are healthy now. I look forward to seeing how the economy grows in the new year and what the country can accomplish in the international market, says Zhang. For many families, it was the first time bringing children to festive gatherings during the nation's biggest holiday. Xi Jia took her 7-year-old son to Qianmen, a popular historic tourist area. Last year, she said she took her son to the Shichahai Lake to play on the ice, but there were no temple fairs. He has never experienced what a traditional New Year is like because 3 years ago, he was too young and he had no memory of what New Year celebration is, she says.
In front of a small memorial of flowers and children's toys, Julia Pugach wipes her tears and says her prayers in a sleepy Kiev suburb. She's praying for those who lost their lives after a helicopter came tumbling through the fog and crashed into a kindergarten building on Wednesday.
Mothers and children laid flowers and toys as they walked by the kindergarten on the days following the crash. Meanwhile, a small broom and dustpan in hand, Olga Pranzlevich cleaned up the debris along the road next to a cordoned-off mound of charred vehicles and misshapen wreckage. But she can't sweep away the terrible memory of seeing the government helicopter that carried Ukraine's interior minister tumbling through the fog, or the frantic dash afterward to save the children. Nearby, investigators photographed the scene as they tried to piece together how Wednesday's crash happened. This is the hard lesson Ukrainians have had to learn in a week of mourning at least 59 dead in places that many considered safe from the violence of the war against Russia, now in its 11th month. Since February, they have seen lives lost from missile strikes and battlefield combat, and civilians dying in schools, theaters, hospitals, and apartment buildings. They have suffered irretrievable losses, a loved one, a place to call home, and for some, any hope for the future. But this past week seemed to have special cruelty to it. It started on the weekend when a barrage of Russian missiles slammed into an apartment complex that housed about 1,700 people in the southeastern city of Dnipro. The January 14th barrage killed 45 civilians, including 6 children, and the deadliest strike on the civilians since spring, in an area once considered safe for many who fled frontline areas farther east. Then came Wednesday's helicopter crash at the kindergarten in the Kiev suburb of Brovary that killed 14, including Interior Minister Denis Monastersky, other members of his ministry, and the aircraft's crew. One child on the ground was killed and 25 people were injured, including 11 children. Monastersky, who is 42-year-old, had been traveling to the front line when the Super Puma helicopter went down in the fog, although no official cause has been determined. Flowers piled up Friday at the fence outside the kindergarten. A 73-year-old woman hung a plastic bag full of aloe vera plants after reading that they might help burn victims. Inside a hospital ward in Dnipro, where she was recovering from last weekend's missile attack, Olga Botvinova celebrated with birthday balloons and cards. It wasn't her actual birthday, she said, but she believed she was born a second time by merely surviving. She had fled war-ravaged Donetsk in 2014 when Moscow-backed separatists seized the city. In the spring of 2022, they had to flee again, this time from the city of Kherson after it fell to the Russians. She thought she would be safe in Dnipro. The missile attack blew out kitchen and bedroom walls of dozens of apartments. Inside life, as it was moments before the blast, is preserved. In an 8th-floor kitchen with bright yellow walls, a bowl of apples was untouched.
Now let's take a look at our regular feature on sports. Novak Djokovic will continue his bid for a record-extending 10th Australian Open men's singles title against home favourite Alex de Minaur in the 4th round on day 8 on Melbourne. The former world number 1 defied ongoing hamstring troubles in the 3rd round to beat Grigor Dimitrov in straight sets and record his 24th successive win at the Grand Slam.
Grigor is someone that I truly admire and respect. He's one of my best friends on the tour. We go back a long time. And he's one of the most talented players that you'll see on the tour. He's been around for many years. He's such a great athlete. I thought double break in the 3rd was going to be enough for me, but he was locked in from that moment. Up to the very last shot, I didn't know whether I'm going to prevail or not. So. It was an incredible battle, 3 sets over 3 hours. Let's rest up and prepare for next one.
The Serb, 35, is bidding to reach his 13th quarterfinal at Melbourne Park, where he has not lost since 2018. That winning streak includes 3 successive titles in 2019, 2020 and 2021, before he was forced to miss last year's tournament after his visa was cancelled. The reigning Wimbledon champion can return to world number 1 if he wins a record equaling 22nd major men's singles title, and injury permitting, he is favourite to do so. But he must first overcome 23-year-old Australian de Minaur and a partisan home support on the Rod Laver Arena to reach the last 8. Russian 5th seed Andrei Rublev or Danish 9th seed Holger Rune await the winner, with Spaniard Alberto Bautista Agut up against unseeded American Tommy Paul, the highest ranked of the possible semi-final opponents in the bottom half of the draw. Elsewhere on Monday, women's 4th seed Caroline Garcia of France will play Poland's Magdalena on Rod Laver Arena after Belarusian 5th seed Ariana Sabalenka plays Swiss 12th seed Belinda Bencic. On Kia Arena, Britain's Neil Skupski and Dutch partner Wesley Koolhof, the top seeds, play Nikola Kasic and Aysem Ulhak Qureshi in the third round of the men's doubles, while second seed Joel Halsbury of Britain American partner Rajiv Ram face Hugo Nys and Jan Zielinski. John Ram rolled to a win at the American Express on Sunday afternoon, besting Davis Thompson with a final round 68 in La Quinta, California. The win marked Ram's second consecutive on the PGA Tour and his fourth victory in his past 6 international starts. John Ram proved on Sunday that he is the best player in the world. While his stretch of wins won't catapult Ram to the #1 ranking in the world, there's no question that Ram is dominating the sport.
Solid round of golf. That's just kind of how it goes. Had I had the same putt I had yesterday or Friday, it would have probably been a runaway victory, but can't ask for everything. So you learn in every single situation, and today was definitely a stressful day.
Ram entered Sunday with a share of the lead at 23 under. He and Davis were 4 shots ahead of the rest of the field. He opened Sunday with a pair of birdies, picking up right where he left off after Saturday's 7 under 65. Ram's lone stumble came at the par 3 13th on Sunday after his tee shot missed the green. He quickly offset the bogey with a birdie 3 holes later after he narrowly escaped a disastrous approach shot. Ram is on a T1 that nobody else in the golf world seems to be able to disrupt. He opened the year with 2 tour wins in as many starts, with first his comeback win at the Century Tournament at Champions in Hawaii and now this weekend in Southern California. Those wins came on the heels of the DP World Tour wins last fall, first at the Acciona Open de España in October and at the DP World Tour Championship in November. Ram's only other starts during this stretch came at the CJ Cup, where he finished tied at 4th, and at the Hero World Challenge, Tiger Woods' unofficially charity event in the Bahamas. Ram entered the week #4 in the official World Golf Rankings. He'll move up only 1 spot with his win, something Ram has been frustrated with after the OWGR made tweaks to how it calculates its standings last fall. Neither the Century Tournament of Champions or the DP World Tour Championship wins carry as much weight as his other 2, which Ram called laughable in November. Here's the weather forecast of all major cities. Well, that's all for today, and thank you for staying with us. We'll see you tomorrow with more news and updates. Have a nice evening. Goodbye.